What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button, and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
Or first half of the 20th century, everyone knows that the history of automobiles in their modern sense of the word began with the products of Daimler and Benz. And now, an amazing fact, it was Wartburg was the third German company engaged in the production of cars in the century before last. At the end of 1896, a certain association of German banks created the company Versuchsfabrik Eisenach AG. The manager of the factory was the Cannon King Heinrich Erhardt, and initially here were engaged in the production military weapons, heavy artillery guns and cannons. Given the inevitable and not so distant World War I, the choice of the Eisenach plant's sphere of activity was quite understandable. However, there were also produced other equipment, for example, bicycles, but also mainly for the needs of the army. After all, at the beginning of the last century, two-wheeled non-motorized transport was widely used in the military sphere. 2 years later, in 1898, on the basis of a three-wheeled car de Dion was created a prototype of a self-driving baby carriage, which received a Benz engine. However, the public received the car rather cool, so Erhardt soon established contacts and signed an agreement with the French company Société de Corval. The result of cooperation was the first Wartburg car, Wagon Model 1. Where did the unusual name come from? It is very simple. Wartburg is a medieval castle near Eisenach, which was built at the end of the 9th century. Two Wartburgs, an early automobile and a medieval castle at first. Cars of this model were equipped with a 4-horsepower de Dion engine with a volume of 480 cubes, and a little later received a more powerful 0.8-litre motor, which gave out already 5 horses. Do not hurry to smile. With such power, Wartburgs accelerated to quite acceptable at the turn of the century 40 km per hour. Wartburg Wagon Model 2 was noticeably more powerful and spacious. On the basis of the third model, equipped with a 45 horsepower engine, was built racing version 45 HP, but there comes a time when the company becomes unprofitable, and the owners simply fired the head of the company, which was soon renamed to Dixie. In the future, it was envisaged not just the production of cars of a single model, but also a noticeable expansion of the model range. The production of a whole family, or series, of T, and then R. They differed not only in design and shape of the body, but also in power and number of cylinders in the engines. During the First World War, the company completely switched to the production of military equipment and weapons, and in the post-war years it was forced to merge with the factory Gotha Wagon Fabric, producing a number of pre-war models, as well as trying to establish production of its own small car called Diana. Alas, there was not enough time or opportunities to bring it to the point, so at the end of 1927 in Eisenach began production of Dixie DA1, licensed Austin 7. English Austin and German Dixie are both twins and brothers. The car turned out to be quite successful and had a clear commercial success, producing thousands of copies. And here in the history of the brand comes an unexpected turn. The company buys out the company, BMW, because of what the small car gets a double name BMW Dixie, but soon the prefix after the hyphen will disappear. But the sporty version of BMW 315s was named Wartburg. However, it was produced for a short time and in small quantities. By 1932, the company had produced about 25,000 of these cars in the conventional version, and the license purchased from the British expired. However, the company's engineers, using the developments of the previous model, created their own car series AM. It was distinguished by independent suspension of all wheels and the upper location of valves, almost racing technology by the standards of the 30s. New BMW models were produced in Eisenach at this time, as motorcycles were produced in Munich. And then the Second World War broke out. Based on the way it ended, the Americans transferred Thuringia to the Soviet military administration. The plant was once again renamed Sowjetische AG Maschinenbau Autowello, AO Soviet Machine Building Enterprise Autowello, and here, they started to produce pre-war cars under the BMW brand. Not surprisingly, a big scandal soon broke out. Munich claimed that the factory in Eisenach was using the BMW brand illegally. As a result, the company was renamed VEB Automobilwerk Eisenach, People's Enterprise Automobilwerk Eisenach, or AWE, and the cars received the abbreviation EMW, But by the mid-50s, former BMWs were removed from production, and instead of them began production of IFA F9, a model that had much in common with the pre-war prototype DKW, which AWE received from the former factory Hawk. IFA, a small car of the pre-Wartburg era Action 2, post-war. Hello, Wartburg, we hope you're not completely confused in all these complex intricacies of German brands, but it was in 1955 that the car was released, which received the historical trade name Wartburg. Model 311 was produced with all possible variants of bodies: sedan, convertible, station wagon, coupe, and even roadster. The latter deserves a more detailed recollection. A sporty version with an open two-seat and two-door body was presented at the Leipzig Fair in 1957. The Wartburg 313-1 Sportwagen Coupe was more commonly referred to as the Wartburg Sport, and was notable for the fact that a soft top was available at extra cost as an option, while the car's standard equipment was a rigid removable roof. After the three-cylinder engine was equipped with a trio of carburetors, the Wartburg Sport produced 50 horsepower and accelerated up to 140 km per hour. Although this model with half 100 horses, of course, could be considered sporty only conditionally, and for 3 years it was possible to produce less than half a thousand of such cars, which are nowadays considered to be real rarities, objects of collectors' hunting. In the mid-60s, the Model 353, the same Wartburg, which is associated by the vast majority of motorists with this German brand, appeared on the automobile scene in Eastern Europe. Its history is already well known to our readers, but we propose to focus on prototypes, which were regularly created in Eisenach for almost 2 decades in a row. So, back in the days of the first post-war Wartburg, the P100 prototype was created, a 4-door sedan whose distinguishing feature was an opposition motor located within the wheelbase. One of the P100 prototypes, the second prototype, has large rectangular headlights and turn signals located next to each other, which went to the sides of the front fenders. By the way, this characteristic solution then became a kind of business card of the 353rd appearance. Wartburg Sport was not forgotten at this time, having developed the center-engine prototype 313-2. The P100 prototype was also reflected in the experimental roadster 313 to 2 other Wartburgs with a potentially progressive front wheel drive platform. Needless to say, both the Soviet Moskvich and the Italian Fiat 124 remained faithful to the classic archaic rear wheel drive. Eisenach decided to create their own Golf before the Golf. It became a front-wheel drive, two-wheel drive 355 coupe, which was later remarkably similar to the Volkswagen Passat B1. And this similarity was noticed not only by us, but also by the admirers of Volkswagen brand. No matter how you look at it, it makes no sense to deny the similarity between the concept and the production Passat apparently on one of the prototypes of Wartburg 355, second photo, taillights were borrowed from VAZ3. But the museum exhibit has rear optics from VAZ 2106. From 1968 to 1973, the year of the beginning of Passat B1 production, 4 prototypes of 355 were produced. Alas, despite the fact that under the hood of the coupe from the east was placed a 4-stroke Renault engine, there was no serious talk about launching the car in serial production, because there was no funding for this, and the ordinary Wartburg 353 in the CMEA countries at that time was in steady demand. However, the alien heart in the engine compartment, and the experimental Wartburg itself, appeared for a reason. In the mid-70s, the world was moving towards stricter environmental requirements for cars. The 2-stroke motor of the serial Wartburg, in which oil had to be added directly to the gasoline, so that it burned inside the engine, together with fuel, had a very dirty exhaust even visually, so it would be ridiculous to talk about any standards of CO and CH emissions in this case. East German engineers understood that the world needed a fundamentally new Wartburg, firstly, with a modern 4-stroke gasoline engine, and secondly, with a load-bearing body. Let's not forget that the 353 had a frame construction. Externally, the 4-door prototype resembled something between a small Volvo and experimental Scotus, which we recalled recently. Recently in Eisenach there were works on installation of gas turbine engine on the car, and it was planned to create together with Skoda a new generation of cars of the same class. The project was called RGW Auto P760, and it was to be produced by Skoda, Wartburg, and even Trabant. Prototypes. It was assumed that at first both Czechs and East Germans would produce this model under different brands. And then each of the companies would create its own design, which would allow to identify the brand, immediately distinguishing the new Wartburg from Skoda or Trabant. 355 at this time a little Podmorafetli, at the same time repainting it in cheerful green colour, and a year later, in 1978, there was another and almost desperate attempt to radically modernise the Wartburg, releasing another prototype, this time model 610M. It had a lot in common with the 360 and was characterised by a more cleaned-up appearance, under which the Renault units were to be located. Alas, and in this case prototypes had almost no chance to reach the assembly line. The production Wartburg 353 only underwent body metamorphoses, adding to the traditional sedan variants with station wagon, tourist, and pickup, trans, bodies, and in 1985 the car received a more powerful engine and plastic trim parts instead of chrome. Pickup and station wagon diluted the unity of the sedan, and now let's remember that Intelliati Giguli received a similar makeover. Back in 1980, Model 2105, and just in 1985 front-wheel drive Sputnik Samra appeared on the streets of the USSR and roads of Europe, to which Wartburg was as far away from them as the castle of the same name in Thuringia was from a brand new 9-story panel building. And only at the end of the 80s behind the driving Wartburg no longer stretched a blue plume of burnt oil, because the Wartburg 1300 received not only a fresher appearance, but also, finally, quite modern 4-stroke gasoline engine Volkswagen 1.3 litres and 64 horses, exactly as on the Soviet 8. If a variant with such appearance and engine Volkswagen appeared 5 to 8 years earlier, the Wartburg would certainly be in great demand. At the end of its life journey, alas, neither heart transplant nor cosmetic procedures helped the aged Wartburg for a simple reason. East and West Germany were uniting at that moment, which meant that the fate of the socialist Wartburgs and Trabants would be the same. Trabants was a foregone conclusion. The unwilling protagonist of our story became the property of history in 1991, when the factory in Eisenach was acquired by Opel. And the Wartburg brand itself, because none of the prototypes became serial and was not widely known in its time, is still associated by most motorists with a single model, the 353rd. In conclusion, the story of the Wartburg prototype serves as a fascinating glimpse into the innovative spirit of automotive design during a time of rapid change. While these unique vehicles never made it to production, they reflect a bold vision that challenged the norms of their era, much like BMW's own commitment to pushing boundaries. By exploring these lesser-known prototypes, we gain a deeper appreciation for the creativity and ambition that drives the automotive industry forward. Thank you for joining us on this journey through design history, and we hope it inspires you to look beyond the surface of familiar brands to discover the hidden gems of automotive innovation.